I'm just so grateful that God has been kind to me, that God has been kind to you, and that we're here together this morning. I just want to say thank you. For those of you who are here, you braved the inclement weather to be here in the room today, to be with God's people, to worship. And to those of you who are watching online, we admit you are smarter than us, and you're doing the right thing, probably the smart thing, but we miss you, and we hope that you enjoy being with us through technology. But if we've never had a chance to meet, my name is Will, and I have the great, and truly it is a great honor and a privilege to serve as the pastor here at Calvary, and just want to say thank you. What a gift it is to worship together today. And let's begin our time together before we get into our sermon with praying the Lord's Prayer together. So will you pray with me? Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen. Well, we've spent the last 12, 13 weeks studying the book of James, and I hope you guys enjoyed that. Hopefully it was very practical, how to apply God's wisdom to sort of all these everyday aspects of our lives, and I was blessed by that. I hope you were, but we have closed the book on James, and we're moving to a new sermon series today, a little mini-series. It's just going to be a couple of weeks, and it's going to be a build-up to Easter. Easter, if you're not a Christian, maybe you're not familiar with church, Easter is a big deal. Easter is a big deal for Christians because it is the day in the calendar which for thousands of years Christians have marked this day as sacred to celebrate and remember the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. And the purpose of the next couple of weeks here on Sunday mornings is to prepare us, our hearts and our minds, for Easter Sunday. The goal is that these couple of weeks kind of lead us up, and we come in here on Easter Sunday just filled with gratitude for the resurrection of Jesus and the life that it brings. And the series that we're doing for the next couple of weeks is called Glimpses of Resurrection. And we're going to spend 2 weeks in what is one of my favorite chapters in all of the Gospels, and it's Mark chapter 5. And this is one of my favorite chapters in the Gospels because it recalls some just really beautiful events in Jesus' life. And this falls early in the Gospel of Mark, and at this time in Jesus' life, people aren't really sure what to make of Jesus. You know, Jesus is he's just sort of coming on the scene, and he's teaching and he's doing some things, and people aren't really sure who he is or what he's come to do. And around Mark chapter 5 in the Gospel of Mark, he starts doing things that we call miracles, and they give glimpses into what his real purpose is. We call them miracles, but the Gospel writers call them signs. In the Gospels, miracles are called signs because they point to something greater, and what they point us to is what Jesus came to do. And so the things that Jesus does and says in Mark chapter 5 are like signs or maybe like breadcrumbs that if we follow them, they will lead us to see the resurrection of Jesus, see what it was all about. Because, while I believe with great conviction that the resurrection is indeed a historical one-time event that changed human history, I also believe that the resurrection power of God is not something that showed up once at the empty tomb on Easter Sunday, but it's something that has always been pulsing through everything that Jesus did. And so we're at Mark 5, we're going to see that resurrection was always the plan. We're going to see glimpses of it. So we begin today with Mark 5, and it's the story of Jesus healing a man possessed with many demons. And the big idea here that I want you to get, I'll go ahead and tell you on the front end, is this, is that Jesus, what we see in this passage is Jesus is willing to cross all sorts of boundaries at great danger and cost to himself. Boundaries, geographical boundaries, spiritual boundaries, social boundaries, and he does this so that he can bring resurrection life to the most hopeless people and places. And so we're going to do Mark chapter 5. We're going to start in verse 1. We're going to read 20 verses, okay? And listen, most of you sat through 2 whole basketball games last night. You can handle 20 verses, all right? So don't go to sleep on me right here. But I'm going to read the whole thing, all right? Mark chapter 5, verse 1. They came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes. And when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. He lived among the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain, for he had been often bound with shackles and chains. But he wrenched the chains apart, and he broke the shackles in pieces, and no one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. And when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and fell down before him. And crying out with a loud voice, he said, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you, by God, do not torment me." For Jesus had been saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" And he replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And he begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country. Now a great herd of pigs, though, was feeding there on the hillside, and they begged him, saying, "Send us to the pigs, let us enter them." So he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs, and the herd, numbering 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and drowned in the sea. The herdsmen fled and told it in the city and in the country, and people came to see what it was that had happened. And they came to Jesus and saw the demon-possessed man, the one who had had the legion, sitting there now, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who had seen it described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man and to the pigs, and they began to beg Jesus to depart from their region. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed with demons begged him that he might be with him, and he did not permit him, but said to him, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone marveled. All right. In order to understand this passage of Scripture, we need to know what happened just before it. And what happened just before this is a story that if you've grown up around the Bible, you may be familiar with, and it's the story of Jesus calming the storm. So the disciples, Jesus and the disciples are on one side of the Sea of Galilee, the Jewish side, because these are Jewish people. And Jesus, after a day of teaching, he says, "Let's get in the boat with his disciples." He says, "Everybody load up. We're going to the other side of the sea." And so they get in the boat, a boat of about 20, 25 feet long. There's 12 of them packed in it. And they get out in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, and a storm rises up. And it's a bad storm, and we know it's a bad storm because half of the disciples were professional fishermen. And this storm is so bad that these guys who've been on the water their whole lives think that they're going to die. This might be the worst storm they've ever seen. And they're screaming, they're yelling at Jesus, they're panicking, and they're saying, "Jesus, why are you not doing anything about this?" In fact, the text says that Jesus was asleep in the back of the boat on a cushion. All right, he was comfortable. And they wake him up and they say, "Jesus, why are you not doing anything?" And Jesus stands up, and just as cool as can be, he says, "Peace, be still." And it says, instant, the winds and the waves ceased, and it was calm. And the disciples, they look at one another, and they say, and they ask a question, and this is the question that the rest of Mark 5 is answering. Their question is, who is this man that even the winds and the waves obey him? And so they ask this question, and they're not even sure they know the answer to it. And about that time that they answer this question, as the sea has been calmed, the boat drifts to the shore on the other side of the Sea of Galilee. So this whole story of Jesus calming the storm sets the stage for what's about to happen. And what happens is this: Jesus steps out of the boat, and immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. And it may seem to most of us that we have very little in common with a man filled with unclean spirits. We often look at this story, and I think for many of us, this story we read it as an academic exercise. We're curious about it. We may have questions about demons and spiritual warfare, or maybe you're here and maybe you just can't get over the part about the pigs, and you're disturbed by that. But we often approach this passage as if it's a very foreign thing to us, but I want you to see this morning that this at its core is a personal story. It's a story about a man who was one thing, and he had an encounter with Jesus, and he became something else entirely. And I hope you see this morning that you are more like this man filled with unclean spirits than you are unlike him. And I'm telling you that's good news, because what that means is that the same deliverance Jesus offered him, he offers to you and me. So what do we know about this man? I'm going to walk through the passage, okay? Just kind of walk through the narrative, and then I'll give you 2 points at the very end. But most of this sermon is just going to be walking through Mark chapter 5. And there's kind of 3 movements. We see that the man was enslaved, we see that he's delivered, and we see that he was given a mission. All right, so let's look that he was enslaved. All right, it says he was living among the dead, living in a graveyard. Now, under any circumstance, that's creepy. All right, that's spooky. Who lives in a graveyard? Who lives among the tombs? That is, even in our culture, we would think that is weird. But to Jesus' disciples, these were Jewish men, and to Mark's readers, these were Jewish readers, this is the most disturbing thing in the world. Because the one thing, in the Jewish mind, the one thing you avoided more than anything was uncleanliness. And there's nothing more unclean than death and pigs. And Jesus goes to both of them in this story. And that's where this man was. He was in the tombs. And this graveyard represents not only his location, but it represents the state of his soul. He was isolated. He was alone. He was disconnected from community. He's the type of man that when parents were with their kids, they would shield their children when this man was around. Don't you dare ever go into the graveyard. Don't you go around that man. He's crazy. He was isolated. This was a true outcast of society. He was isolated, he was alone, he was ashamed, and he was disconnected. Now, when I lived in New York City, I had several opportunities over the years that we were there to preach at the New York City Rescue Mission. It's now called the Bowery Mission. But this is one of the most long-standing shelters in the United States and has a long history of ministry in New York for hundreds of years. And one week I'm preaching to a group of men who are unhoused, and most of them are addicts and they live on the streets, and they're in this room filled with these guys, and I'm preaching on this passage. And I didn't know what I didn't know, and I'm preaching on this part about the tombs, and I'm telling them what the tombs meant in first century and all this sort of stuff, and I noticed that they were all talking to each other. And I was like, why aren't you guys listening to me, right? I'm the one with the microphone, like, are you guys not paying attention? And I'm like, what is all this commotion? Why are these guys not listening to me? Why are they talking to each other? They were all just turned to each other, nodding their heads, and they were talking, and I just kind of, while I was preaching, I thought, you know what? These guys, they're here for a hot meal. They're here for a warm shower and a warm bed, and they've got to sit through a sermon to get that. And you know what? If they want to talk through my sermon so they can get a shower, then I'll stand up here and do what I got to do, right? But I just thought that they weren't paying any attention to me. But what I found out later is that they were super engaged with what I was doing, but they were talking amongst themselves when I was talking about the tombs. And what they were doing, and you're going to find out in a second, they were interacting with the passage. Okay, and there's a lesson here. You know, you can talk back to me when I preach, okay? You get a better sermon when you do that, I too. But they were interacting with the passage, and here's what they were talking about. Somebody told me about this that night after I was done. You see, just across the street from the New York City Rescue Mission in Lower Manhattan, there is an overcrowded prison. It's where the addicted, the unhoused in Lower Manhattan are often sent so that they'll not be noticed or seen. And often what will happen is when there's a big event in the city or when there's something nice supposed to happen and there's a big event around and they don't want those people to disrupt the sophistication and the cleanliness of the right people. There are certain moments where they will round up all these addicts, these unhoused people, they'll arrest them and they'll send them to this overcrowded prison. And every man in that room had spent many evenings in that prison feeling the shame of being told, no one wants to see you. So let's crowd you into this prison so that no one has to see you. And do you know what the name of that prison is? The Tombs. It's the name of the prison. So when I started talking about the tombs, these guys were like, we know what he's talking about. They knew what it meant to be isolated. They knew what it meant to be cast aside. They knew what it meant to be shunned from view. And when they heard this story, what they heard was, are you kidding me? Jesus goes to the tombs? He crosses the sea and goes to the graveyard? He crosses the street and enters into the prison? They heard this story with fresh eyes and ears because they saw themselves in this man. And you may be here and you go, well, I can't relate to a demon-possessed man, and I certainly can't relate to an unhoused addict in New York City. But here's the thing that we all know, we've all experienced: loneliness, isolation, and shame. Those are the things that mark this man's life. Those are the things that mark these unhoused addicts' lives, and those are the things that mark our lives all too often. We're marked by isolation, loneliness, and shame. And this is why I believe many people are resistant to the call of Jesus on their lives. This may perhaps be why many of you are resistant to the call that Jesus has for your life. You think to yourself, if people really knew who I was, they would reject me. If God knew who I was, He would reject me. And so here's what many of us do, and I don't think I'm alone, all right? We're all 99% the same anyway. We've all experienced this. You look at everybody else, they look like they have it all together. Right? They had their hands raised during the worship. They seem like they know where to turn in their Bibles. And man, they've got it all together, probably just humming hymns in the car on the way home. Hey, they've got it figured out. But then you know your own heart. So you see everybody else's exterior. You know your interior. And you go, I must be the flawed one. I must be the fake. I must be the different one. And then you start telling yourself these lies. If those people sitting around me saw the real me, they would never accept me. And so you start grappling with the shame that you're carrying, shame of what you've done, shame of what you've felt, shame of what's been done to you, and you feel unclean, you feel unworthy, and you may be accepted, but you feel like if you were ever seen, you would be rejected. And I'm here to tell you, just like I told those men at the rescue mission, Jesus does not run away from you in your shame, but He runs towards you in your shame. And see, this man, not only was he filled with shame, but he was filled with power. And we often think power is a good thing, but many of us often use our power to shield us from the good gifts that God wants to give us. It says he broke his chains apart and ripped his shackles in two, and we go, well, that's pretty impressive. I'd like to be able to rip some handcuffs off. People might fear me. People might respect me. But what we see is this man is using his strength to keep people at a distance. And while most of us in this room, you probably aren't able to conjure up impressive physical feats of strength like that, but I think all of us use our power that we have to build walls and protect us from other people and to protect us from God. And many of us do this. We isolate ourselves with maybe the power of our career. Or in our strength and our power, we put up walls so that nobody can ever hurt us again. Or maybe you use the power of your accomplishments, whether that's academic or athletic, or whether that's in your career. And you use those things to shape and protect an image that protects you from feeling shame and protects others from seeing the real you. But you know what's in your heart, and you know that those walls that you build are a prison of your own making, and you feel loneliness and you feel misery, but you don't know what to do about it, so you keep the walls up. And on the outside, this demon-possessed man, he looked independent. He looked like one of those guys that, I don't need anybody. I don't need you. He looked impressive, but it says all day he cried out. And again, maybe you don't relate to a naked man crying out in a cemetery. But maybe you relate to this. The young mother with the Instagram picture-perfect family. You project strength. Everybody looks on your profile and they like and they share and they comment about how inspiring you are. But you know that you weep at night, lonely, because you feel that the person you're projecting is not the person you are. And you feel like if anybody knew the real you, they would reject you and you would be all alone. I think of the man with the super impressive career. People celebrate you for your achievements. You feel strong. Everybody applauds you. But when you're driving home in the car, when it's just you, you feel loneliness, deep loneliness. Because you know that no one actually knows the real you. And you believe the lies that if they did, you would be rejected, that you'd be found out, that you'd be exposed. And so you would rather stick to hiding than let someone love the real you. And this man was enslaved. He was alienated from God, he was alienated from others, and he was alienated from himself. And that is the human condition apart from God. And I suspect if we're honest with ourselves, we've all felt this before. You may not be demon-possessed, but you know the forces of shame and darkness and isolation. But here's where the story turns and becomes good news. Jesus shows up in this man's life unexpectedly. Jesus wasn't pursuing him, or this man wasn't pursuing Jesus, Jesus was pursuing him. And he becomes delivered. It says, when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and fell down before him. And crying out with a loud voice, he said, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God?" Now, that answers the question the disciples asked, isn't it? Who is this man that the winds and the waves obey? And this guy knows the answer. Who are you? What are you going to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? He says, "But I adjure you, God, by God, do not torment me." Now, this is a fascinating encounter because it's a paradox, right? Because he runs to Jesus, he falls at his feet, and he shouts at him. He is both attracted to Jesus and repulsed by Jesus at the same time. He calls on Jesus and pushes him away at the same time. And I don't know about you, but I can relate to that. These moments in my life where I'm like, God, I want more of you, but I'm terrified of what more of you would bring. And why do we do this? Why do we hold on? This is when we hold on to the things that are keeping us in bondage because we're afraid that if we yield to the transforming power of Jesus, that we don't know what's on the other side of freedom. And we're comfortable with our bondage, but we're uncertain about what freedom would look like on the other side. And again, you may not be in a graveyard screaming at the top of your lungs, but you might be here and you're hiding out behind a smile. You're hiding out behind a busy schedule. And you're so afraid that your secret is going to be let out. Perhaps you're hiding out in a locked room, trapped in front of a computer screen, enslaved to a habit that you feel powerless to break. And you're calling out to God on one hand, God, take this from me, but on the other hand, you're not willing to give it to Him. You may be here and you're holding on to a relationship that you know in your heart is toxic to your soul. But for fear of being alone, you hold on to it. God, fix this, but I won't let it go. Maybe perhaps you're here and you're like this man and you're harming yourself. You want to be free from this self-loathing, but you're afraid to let go of that control. And one minute you're crying out to Jesus for help, and the next you're saying, but I don't know if I want to be free because I'm afraid that freedom might be just as painful. See, we're not so different from this man, are we? And Jesus, He approaches this man, and what He says is so compassionate. He looks at him, and He asks one question. What is your name? What is your name? And I imagine what this would have been like for this man. You know, in my own shame this week, as I've been thinking about, ministry to the unhoused in New York as it relates to this sermon, and I was just thinking, I lived in New York for 8 years, and every day on my walk to work, I walked past multiple people. Every day. 8 years. And I didn't know half of their names because I never asked, because I didn't care. They were invisible to me. And that's how most of us go about our lives, and that's how this man felt, invisible. People walk by all the time, and nobody asked his name, and then all of a sudden, here comes this man who comes on a boat from the other side of the sea out of nowhere and says, hey, what's your name? He dignifies him. He sees him as a person with a name, with a background, with a story, with a history, with a hope, with a future. What is your name? Jesus wants to enter a relationship with him. And the man's response is tragic, and this is where we find out that this man is not just a man, but he's being possessed. Jesus says, what is your name? And he says, my name is Legion, for we are many. And we find out that it isn't even this man's voice that is speaking at all, but it is the voice of the things that are oppressing him speaking. This word legion is a Roman military term, which is a unit of soldiers as high as 6,000 soldiers. Roman legions were known throughout the first century world for their brutality, for their destruction, for pillaging entire cities. They're the ones who would carry out Jesus' crucifixion orders. And this man, it says, a legion is oppressing him, seeking total destruction over his life. And Jesus looks at him and says, what is your name? Jesus says, I know who you are, and I'm still here, and I still want to know you. Jesus says to this man, I see beyond the things that are occupying your mind and enslaving your soul. I see deeper than that. And some of you are here, you are hiding the biggest secret in the world. But can I tell you something? Jesus knows your secret. And the reason you work so hard to hide your secret is because you're terrified that if anybody knew it, you'd be rejected for good. But Jesus knows it. And he approaches you and he says, what is your name? Jesus sees it and he still comes to you. That is God's mercy. He draws near. He's not repulsed by you. Well, the demons that occupy this man, they say to Jesus, they say, send us to the pigs. Now, people have a ton of questions about this part, okay? And I'll be honest, if I had a time machine and could go see any biblical thing, the resurrection would be up there. This would be pretty close, all right? I'd want to see this. But people have a lot of questions about this. Maybe you're here, you're a skeptic, and you're like, demons and pigs and cast out, and do you guys really believe this? Yeah, it's a fair question. Maybe you're here, you're an animal lover, and you're like, why would Jesus do this? Why would Jesus do this to these pigs? There's a lot of questions we could ask here, and there's a lot to say, but I'll say this. We don't know why Jesus did it this way. We don't know everything. But I believe that perhaps by allowing these demons that possessed this man to go into these pigs was actually an act of kindness and mercy on the man. Because I just think if I'm this guy, and I'm in bondage to this thing that's oppressing me, Jesus comes and delivers me from it. I know that I'm going to be grateful for that. I'm going to go about my life, but I'm still going to have doubts in my life. And what God gave this man, what Jesus gave this man, was a visual sign that he would never forget. All right? The very thing that was oppressing him left his body, went into 2,000 pigs, and jumped off a cliff and drowned in the sea. You don't forget an image like that. And so this man, any moment he was ever tempted to doubt, any moment he was going, am I fully healed? What if Jesus and all this? Whenever he doubted, he could look back with vivid memory and go, yeah, I saw those pigs. See, this is a gift that Jesus gave him, a vivid memory of the kindness of God. See, it was God's mercy. Now, I've been walking through the narrative. That was a long introduction, okay? Here's the sermon points, all right? Here's the thing you got to know from this story. Jesus goes to great lengths to deliver those whom he loves. In verse 21, this is so fascinating. We see that Jesus, as soon as this encounter is over, moments after healing this man, he gets back in his boat and he sails back to the place that he came from. The exact place he just came from. So if you read between the lines, you realize that Jesus was doing this very important ministry on one side of the Sea of Galilee to his people, the Jewish people. He gets in a boat, sails right off into the eye of a storm, endures a storm, calms the storm with his voice, then sails right into a place of complete darkness, a place of death, a place of uncleanliness, a place where he wasn't welcome, a place where his own people thought he had no business being in because it was unclean. And he heals this man from his demons, then gets back in the boat and goes right back to where he came from, and he did all of it for one man. And what you see is that this man is valuable to Jesus. He's important to Jesus. And he's so important and so valuable that Jesus would drop what he was doing in his homeland to head into a storm and into a place of darkness just to heal this one guy. And there's not a single hint in this text that Jesus did anything else in that city that day. The entire trip was planned for the healing of one man. Now, be encouraged by that this morning, because wherever you are, whoever you are this morning, you feel isolated, you feel in bondage, you feel in darkness, you feel ashamed, and you think no one could ever love me, accept me, welcome me. You must know that Jesus will go through any length necessary to deliver you from the thing that's oppressing you right now. And he has. The scriptures tell us that Jesus left the safety of heaven. Philippians 2, he emptied himself and he entered into the eye of the storm that we call earth. A place plagued by sin and darkness and death and sickness and pain and shame. Jesus left the right hand of the Father in the glories of heaven to come here, a place of utter darkness compared to what he was experiencing with his Father. And he didn't just come here, he went even lower. He became a child, completely helpless. He was born in Nazareth, a little podunk town that nobody cared about or spoke of. He was born into a poor family, to a mother who was looked on by the community with scorn. His whole life on this earth was marked by pain and suffering, and his life was cut short when he, just like this demon-possessed man, was isolated, put in chains, cut, crucified, and placed into a tomb. But 3 days later, he rose from the grave and declared that anyone who will believe in him will receive complete healing from any sin, death, darkness, or shame that plagues you. And he has promised that he is now building a kingdom where one day he will wipe away evil and sickness and shame completely from this earth. And Jesus, after he rose from the dead, he ascended back to where he came from and has said, I will be back. He did this for you. And he did this for me. This is how much he loves you and how much he is willing to endure to see you restored, healed, and put back together. Romans chapter 8 says, for I'm convinced that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all of creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord. And you know, this demon-possessed man, he didn't have the book of Romans yet, but I imagine if he read that verse, he would say, yes, 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 because this is my story. And you say, well, how is that your story? You say, let me tell you about some pigs jumping off of a cliff. And you say, what a gift that he had that image to remember. And we have an image to remember as well, and it's the cross of Christ. Because of the cross, we can fix our eyes on the bloodied, rugged cross and say with confidence that we know for certain that there is nothing that can separate us from the love of God, because Jesus entered into the pain to lead us into his resurrection. And I believe it. If you're here this morning, you think you came to church, but Jesus was coming to you today. I believe God has drawn you here so that you can know that he loves you, and whatever is oppressing you, he wants to heal you and deliver you from it. Jesus has gone to incredible lengths to deliver you. But here's the thing, you must receive it. You must surrender to it. You can't go fall on my face before Jesus and then pull back. You've got to come to him on your feet, on your knees, and open your hands and say, Lord, take what's here and put what you want to give me. You must surrender. And the scriptures tell us that when you do, Jesus brings deliverance. And when you experience deliverance, now the second point, Jesus gives you a story to tell. It says, as he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed with demons begged Jesus that he might go with him. He's like, all right, you just healed me. You just saved my life, Jesus. He's like, I'm getting in the boat. He's like already piling in. And he's like, there's got to be room for one more. Is there a 13th disciple? I mean, do I make the cut? I'm in. Jesus, wherever you go, I go. Wherever you want to take me, I'm going. And Jesus says, no, you can't go. I want you to stay here, and I want you to tell everyone what I have done for you. And we're told that that's exactly what he did. And what's amazing is that in Mark 5, he's the only one who recognizes who Jesus is that day. Even the disciples weren't sure. Who is this man that the winds and the waves obey him? All the people in Decapolis certainly didn't like Jesus that day. You know why? Because he ruined their economy. They're pigs. That's where all their money was. And so they're going, get out of here. Everybody's casting Jesus out that day except for this one man. But Jesus left, and while he was away, this man got to work telling everybody what Jesus had done for him. And he was ready for the day when Jesus came back, and Jesus did come back. In Mark chapter 7, about a year later, Jesus comes back to the Decapolis. He heals a man who is deaf, but instead of the people running him out of town, they worshiped him that day. Verse 37 says, and they were astonished beyond measure, saying, Jesus has done all things well. Now, what changed? In 1 year, people go from running him out of town to receiving him in worship, what changed? Many scholars think, and I agree with them, that this formerly possessed man had been telling everybody about Jesus all year long. And so that when he returned to the Decapolis, people's eyes had been opened to see him for who he truly was. That man paved the way for many people to recognize Jesus for who he was. He was Lord. And he did it by telling his story of what Jesus did for him. And this is what I want for your life. If you have been changed by Jesus, I want you to know that you have a story to tell. I was enslaved, but he delivered me. I was lost, but he came from the other side of the lake to lift me out of my darkness. And he went back to the other side, but he's promised he's coming back. And while I'm waiting for him to come back, I'm going to tell everybody I can that I have a story to tell. You see, this man's story is a glimpse of the resurrection of Jesus. Jesus resurrected all his broken dreams. Jesus resurrected him from the oppression that was killing him and gave him new life. And it points us to a greater story, and I believe our lives can point to a greater story as well. We all can be glimpses of the resurrection because we have a story of God moving us from death to life, from blindness to sight, from lost to being found. And so will you tell the story of Jesus? Let me pray for you. Honor to be your pastor, truly. God, I thank you for this story, a story I've come back to over and over and over again in my life, God, to remind myself that there is no height or depth that could separate me and us from your love. God, what you've done for this man in this story, you've done for us as well. You've entered into the pain and the darkness and the loneliness and the isolation of our lives to give us a new name, a new hope, a new future, a new inheritance, and a new family. You bring resurrection life. And Lord, I pray for anyone here who has never surrendered to the life you have for them, God, that you'd give them the courage today to do it. It's scary. Sometimes we're afraid of what you might call us to, but God, will you give us the faith to believe that what you are calling us to is greater than anything we could ever leave behind. And so, God, give us the courage to believe, the eyes to see, the ears to hear, Lord. And God, for those of us who know you, whose names have been changed, whose futures have been restored, God, would you give us the courage to speak of what we've seen and heard? Would we tell the story while we wait on you to return? And it's in your name we pray. Amen. Church, would you stand? We're going to respond by singing. Listen, I just don't want the day to go by if you're here and you're living in shame, fear, anxiety, worry. I just want to invite you to respond. I'll be here. You can come pray with me. I'd love to pray for you, pray over you. I mean, that might make you nervous. If you just in your seat, you just want to open up your hands and say, Lord, I receive whatever you're trying to give me. And I let go of the things I'm holding on to. Maybe you respond just by singing loud or praying to yourself or even coming and bowing at this altar. There's a million ways to respond to what God's doing. But what I'm asking you is to not clench your fists and reject what he's speaking into your life right now. Would you receive what he's given? So let's sing together.